As far back as I can remember, adult animation has always had a reputation for looking butt ugly. Sure, there are some exceptions. I honestly wouldn't consider staples like The Simpsons, Family Guy, or South Park ugly by any means. But it's hard to deny that a fair share of adult cartoons are a bit of an eyesore, especially from the 2010s onwards. It's like a lot of them chase the look of these shows, but settle on looking marginally worse, while still trying to give off the vibe of the thing they're inspired by. A real we got Family Guy at home type of energy. For the longest time, I didn't think much of this. A lot of these ugly shows still got plenty of seasons, so someone liked them. But lately, I'm starting to get a little concerned. The biggest critique of adult animation is that most of them are sitcoms, low-stakes comedy that, while entertaining, didn't make for prestige television, which is whack, because the medium allows for so much more than pop culture references and cheap dick jokes. As evident with anime truly becoming mainstream this decade, people had an appetite for something more ambitious, and I feel like we've been seeing more shows that meet those demands. So why does it feel like no one's watching them? These shows have compelling character arcs, elaborate world building, and beautiful animation. Yet, no matter how hard I or other animation colleagues gas them up, the people who tuned in every week for story-driven kids cartoons, or the blink and you miss it seasons of Arcane and Invincible, just won't bite, even if they're craving more experimental adult animation. It makes me wonder, is it the art style that's turning them off? Sure, I'll get a comment here and there mentioning that being a barrier for a viewer, but for every comment saying something like that, how many more are thinking it? They say not to judge a book by its cover, but sometimes you just can't help it. Burger King's a guilty pleasure of mine, but I'm not gonna fault someone who doesn't want to eat something that looks like this.
Oh my goodness!
So today, I want to yap about art styles once again, to discern what makes an adult cartoon's art style ugly, if the art styles of newer, underrated gems are holding them back from mainstream success, and if it's a coincidence that a lot of the teen and adult animated series that have blown up over the last couple of years have art styles that are closer to what you find in kids' cartoons. Come on, you know for a fact Mark looks like he should be hanging with Ben 10 and Generator Rex. So what exactly makes an art style ugly? Well, I believe that falls into two categories: ugly on purpose and skill issue. Shows that are intentionally ugly tend to be more grotesque in their character designs. Features tend to get exaggerated and are as unflattering as possible. These art styles may even feature more detail in the character designs to sell the ugly aesthetic, or the character designs and their environments will look disproportionate and crude with clear intent. Off the top of my head, there's Pim from Smiling Friends having one eye that's bigger than the other, and his head being an imperfect circle. Now, a cartoon being ugly on purpose doesn't necessarily translate to it being hard to look at either, as a lot of the times the ugliness is meant to service the comedy. Think of those detailed close-ups you'd see in SpongeBob or Flapjack, or a more fitting example, Meat Cannon cartoons. His insane, wrinkly caricatures of pop culture icons and internet personalities adds to the surreal humor of his shorts. And of course there's shows like Beavis and Butthead, Ren and Stimpy, Secret Mountain Fort Awesome, the list goes on. Though, ugly on purpose doesn't always land. An obvious example being Big Mouth. This one definitely falls into the hard to look at territory for me. So many of these characters look like they're having an allergic reaction with their plump swollen lips. They alternate between rectangle teeth and nubs. Their chins tend to be super small or non-existent, while their heads are ginormous. You can tell this is a show about navigating adolescence because everyone clearly has a lot on their mind. I also think the three-toned eyes of every character adds a lot to the repulsion. It gives a soulless look to these characters, almost like Funko Pops. It makes me afraid to get too close to the TV or else they might pull me in. It's an art style suitable for the awkward horrors of puberty, as that is a phase where kids grow more self-conscious and aren't comfortable in their own skin. I can recognize that even if it's not up my alley. Also, the show just creeps me out. When it comes to comedic value, the designs are very hit or miss. The ones that actually amuse me are those that look like the equivalent of flashbacks in the George Lopez show. They also fit the show's theme so much more than everyone else, who just looks like a normal kid in an ugly art style. The monsters also look fine. That reflects something else about character designs and art styles though. An ugly art style might work better if the main characters are a bit more cartoony in nature. For example, let's look at Michael Cusack's Adult Swim projects. Smiling Friends, Bushworld Adventures, and YOLO all share identical art styles with some minor differences here and there. So why is YOLO the least appealing visually? Something backed up by the numbers and popularity. You think a show with the same sense of humor and visual identity as Smiling Friends would have gotten a buff by association. What gives? Well, a bulk of Smiling Friends characters aren't human, they're critters. It's easier to blend them into this art style. They don't feel ugly, just goofy, with humans often being exaggerated with a ton of wrinkles and other details just for easy laughs. And not all the humans look unappealing. Characters such as Jennifer are drawn to be conventionally attractive while still sporting exaggerated features like her giant f***ing head. When it comes to Bush World Adventures, a lot of the charm of its art style stems from the fact that it's parodying Rick and Morty, another show that has a crude and ugly on purpose art style, although they've reined it in a ton over the years. That show had a glow up equivalent to South Park, where it's becoming more polished and detailed. Still, seeing these characters in a style that's crude in a different direction added to the hilarity of it all. While I really enjoy what I see in the show, I don't think this art style is as appealing when it's not riffing on anything and just stars two normal chicks. Rachel and Sarah look like background characters who'd be in Smiling Friends, if not a little less exaggerated. The show is great, but I don't think it looks all that appealing to a casual audience. What causes Smiling Friends to stand out makes YOLO blend in as just another run-of-the-mill Adult Swim show. Another example of an art style working with some cartoons but not others is the Klasky Chupo shows. The rough art style fits the immature yet imaginative world of Rugrats. It meets the babies on their level while still making sure that the adults don't look too out of place. And it's another show that reined itself in and became a lot neater as it progressed. By the time we hit All Grown Up, I wouldn't call this art style ugly. In fact, it's pretty charming. But then you have shows like the Wild Thornberries that have always just made my stomach hurt. At least when it comes to the girls, whose designs started going to big mouth territory with the protruding lips at the end of their mouths and nubby teeth. The tiny eyes also throw me off a bit, especially when they have lashes that resemble bug legs, which is also common in As Told by Ginger, although that show's a lot easier in my eyes thanks to its color palette, and there's more variety in things such as their head shapes. It just manages to work a little better. I think Nigel and Donnie's designs work in this art style because they go all in on them being freaks. Nigel is 90% nose, and Donnie looks like a cracked out Hey Arnold. Though I'm fond of Debbie's design since the half-covered face, long hair, and angular eyes gives her a lot of appeal. Plus, I had a crush on her as a kid. She was the only reason I'd hold out to commercial break before changing the channel. A lot of my gripes with the design philosophy in Thornberries, and to an extent Ginger, work a lot better in All Real Monsters, because the cast are monsters. When they're human, it's easier for our brains to go, wow, this looks like shit, and never look back. As for skill issue art styles, I tend to think about shows that already go for the generic adult animation style, trying to capture the vibe of Simpsons, Family Guy, or even Rick and Morty, but due to time, budgetary restrictions, or just the show running or art direction itself, misses the mark big time. A middle schooler's first crack at drawing any of the aforementioned shows, rather than something with its own sense of self. Take Border Town for example. It's a show a lot of people knock for trying to be a Family Guy clone, and I absolutely see that in its art style. Yet it's also just how the creator draws, as he had a show on MTV in the early 2000s called 3 South. Because it was the 2000s and everything was still hand-drawn and animated on paper, the art style really thrives here. The show looks like the silly doodles of an art student brought to life. There's also just a greater feeling of depth to it, but with Border Town, it's clear that it's trying to incorporate more elements from Family Guy, from the color palette to the composition of a lot of these scenes. The expressions and character designs feel as if they want to be a McFarlane cartoon while still using Henteman's art style as a base, giving a faux Family Guy look to it and devaluing it in the eyes of animation fans. You innately approach it thinking, well, do I want to watch Family Guy or its Temu ripoff? Neither! Border Town using rigs instead of being animated on paper doesn't do it any favors. You can make a lot of fantastic looking shows with rigs, but that's almost never the case with adult animated sitcoms. 3 South's pencil line art and being drawn frame by frame helped its sketchbook doodles vibe. Border Town just looks like another digital cartoon with movements that feel computerish. Nothing about it feels cohesive. The art style and animation style don't mesh at all. It makes for a truly unpleasant cartoon visually. I think a lot of forgettable adult animation falls into the skill issue category. Brickleberry, Hoops, The Prince, all of them come across as trying to emulate the look of successful adult animated series, but lack the sauce to make them look serviceable. It's the epitome of corporate slop, which is a shame, because no one wants to make a bad cartoon. But when you fail on the most crucial aspect, the art style, and it's yet another sitcom, it's hard to think that the show isn't already set up for failure. People are burnt out on ugly art styles in adult animation, whether or not that style is on purpose. They're also tired of a lot of adult animation looking identical to one another, feeling as if everything's derivative of Fox Prime lineup or Rick and Morty, without understanding why all of those shows are charming. But sadly, this is giving people a lot of apprehension towards new adult animation as a whole, dismissing some incredible shows solely because of their art style. 3 that come to mind are Carol at the End of the World, Fired on Mars, and the incredible Common Side Effects. 3 cartoons that offer so much more than just being sitcoms. They're all dramedies that clearly want to push adult animation into prestige television status, but none of them made the waves that they should, although Common Side Effects does seem to be doing pretty well on Max. I noticed a lot of animation fans who usually gas up the new kids on the block seem disinterested, and I didn't consider the art style being that much of a barrier until this week, where I've been putting in the work preaching the good word of this show. And I've been met with a decent amount of people citing that the art style is what stops them from giving it a whirl. Look up any of these shows I just mentioned on Twitter, and you will quickly run into a remark about their art styles, even when people are complimenting it. Oh, I thought this was going to be another lame sitcom, but this actually looks kinda deep. I know the internet tends to skew negative, but I don't think that discredits what appears to be a popular observation, even if it's not an overwhelming one. And for every person who does tweet or leave a comment about it, how many people out there encountered any of these shows while figuring out what to put on and thought the same thing, not giving it the time of day? It makes me sad because I think these shows are pretty special, and to be honest, I don't think they're all that ugly. But at the same time, a show like Carol and the End of the World isn't doing itself any favors with the thin line art and the gigantic eyes on characters such as Carol. That's going to be distracting for some viewers, to the point of it being a deal breaker, even if it's meant to be something about the character design that helps the show stick out from its peers. I really love the art style of Fired on Mars. It's sort of a mix of King of the Hill and Infinity Train, and the art style's done justice by the animation. It's animated on paper, and it moves great because of it. But even comparing it to King of the Hill feels like an admission that, yeah, it resembles another adult animated sitcom, which means people are already going to write it off as a show, and Zaslav's gonna write it off as a tax expense. Common Side Effects is a beautiful piece of art. It has, by far, the most visually impressive animation to ever air on Adult Swim as an original series, and not an anime. Now keep in mind, I'm talking about the actual animation, how it moves and how dynamic it is, not the art style or compositing. I definitely prefer Boondocks, Venture Bros, or Black Dynamite in that regard. I think what's throwing people off here are the character designs. They have big heads with normal to small size features. Although it's honestly really easy to forget all of that while you're watching because the story is just so damn good. Even so, this is still one of the most unique art styles I've seen in an adult animated series in a while. The style is clearly drawing influence from Akira, just making the proportions a bit more extreme. You can really see it in the eyes and various expressions. And if you can't, it's time to make an appointment with SVS. The show is gorgeous, but it's apparent to me that the bobbleheadish approach to the character designs has been a detriment to its popularity. But then that makes me wonder, if adult cartoons that had way less appealing art styles and poor animation quality were able to garner traction with a casual audience and net multiple seasons, could the art styles of these shows really be what's holding them back? Well, I have a theory. People who are turned off by ugly art styles or anything that looks like generic adult animation aren't going to give these shows a shot because they either don't want to compromise with the visuals or assume it's not going to wow them. That even if they're being championed as a breath of fresh air or deeper than you would expect, they're still going to be predictable sitcoms at the end of the day, which couldn't be further from the truth. Yet at the same time, people who do like adult animated sitcoms with ugly art styles might throw these shows on, assuming they're going to be able to turn off their brains and enjoy some edgy jokes, only to realize, wait a minute, this is making me think and feel things. What the f***? Don't get me wrong, these shows can be pretty funny. Again, I'd call them dramedies and the art styles lean into that. You'll get a few laughs throughout an episode, but they demand your attention. They can get pretty existential and even depressing. If you ate up Paradise PD, like the Flash tattoo artist I had who played it for the waiting room unprompted back in 2018, these shows might not be up your alley. These cartoons having a comedic art style but taking themselves more seriously ironically scares casual viewers off. And I don't mean that as a dig. I'm sure there's live action dramas they eat up, but sadly, so many people view animation as something that's just meant to be comedy or action. Thus, they're not willing to try something that isn't explicitly either of those. So if you want to have an adult animated series that's a bit more ambitious than just being another comedy, while still appealing to a wider audience, what kind of art style would you even go for? Well, judging by some of the most popular adult animated series over the last few years, alongside the biggest hits in indie animation, I've come to realize something. People prefer nostalgic art styles. The art styles that are largely thought to be appealing to children. It's reminiscent of what we grew up with. Take Invincible, for example. Yeah, it's a gory show, but it's also a degree removed from looking like a man of action cartoon. Hell, I remember Critical saying he thought it was a kid's show until the Guardians of the Globe got slaughtered at the end of the first episode.
I initially thought this was a superhero cartoon for kids because it reminded me of something you'd see on Nickelodeon back in the day on Saturday mornings or some shit like that. I thought it was just a simple show to capitalize off superhero hysteria, just a little Weenie Hut Jr. show for your children to enjoy, but I couldn't have been more wrong. This show absolutely slaps, and it is far cry from for kids.
Now, I don't know how the guns and swearing didn't give away that the show was intended for an older audience, but if you went into the show blind and unaware of the comic, I can see the extent of the violence catching you off guard. When they're quipping, you could throw the Cartoon Network logo in the corner with a VHS filter over it, and it just feel right. It's intentionally reminiscent of early 2000s action cartoons, being a lot more simplified than its comic counterpart, which can be extremely detailed, to like a gross degree. If you grew up watching the DCAU or Generator Rex, odds are you locked in with Invincible pretty quickly. Hazbin, Hotel, and Hell of a Boss are often criticized for having overly complicated character designs, but the art direction is a huge reason why they blew up. Vivzie Pop's art style is clearly based off animation she grew up with, like Invader Zim and Disney flicks, giving it a unique visual identity that, yeah, is appealing to kids and teens. Let's not act like Alligator stickers aren't being plastered all over notebooks and binders as we speak, but it also draws in adults who grew up with those exact same things, because it's familiar to them while standing out from the rest of adult animation. The Amazing Digital Circus is geared towards all ages, and Gooseworks has announced it being a kid's show before. But come on! Someone's gonna find this on Netflix and think it's a Nickelodeon cartoon. But again, those designs are appealing. They work even if the story is a bit more mature than what you would expect. Pretty Please, I Don't Want to Be a Metro Girl is clearly targeting a teen or young adult audience, and since it's Kiana Mai's art style, at first glance, it looks like it belongs to the family of kid-focused lore tunes. I remember when my friends started watching Clone High for the first time just a couple years ago. They saw the characters online for years, but had no idea it was an adult animated series until I hit that play button. Because, you know, its UPA style makes it look like something that would have aired after the Powerpuff Girls instead of Real World. I'm just saying, it's evident that the art styles that pulled us in when we were kids are just as captivating now when we're adults. A part of me thinks it's nostalgia, and a part of me thinks it's just because these styles look good. They work for a reason, and they don't have to be confined to a demographic. Just because we're used to certain styles being associated with kids' cartoons doesn't mean they can't be used for something that's intended to be more adult. We grew up watching shows like Danny Phantom, a cartoon of genuine stakes and tension despite it having an identical style to Fairly Odd Parents, a show we rarely took seriously. If an adult cartoon came out that looked like Butch Hartman style, but had blood and swearing and sakuga, people would eat it up. Me included! Same thing with Samurai Jack and Dexter. Same creator, similar art styles, but we were able to take one a bit more seriously. Hell, Jack had its final season on Adult Swim. It fully transcended to an adult animated series, and the art style really didn't change all that much. The fact that these newer projects that were influenced by kids' media visually are finding massive success that's eclipsing a lot of shows that rock the ugly or basic adult animation art styles makes me think we're going to see more adult animated series like these in the future, which I welcome with open arms because it'll lead to more variety and more people will be willing to give all kinds of adult animation a shot. And that's what the medium truly deserves. But until that day arrives, watch Common Side Effects! Alright, peace.